Snow fell in soft, whispering layers across the quiet countryside, turning a little town into a postcard of winter. It was Christmas Eve, a night when silence held its own kind of music, the hush of the world wrapped in white. Inside a modest wooden cabin on the edge of the forest, warm light glowed through frosted windows. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifted through the rooms, a gentle reminder that tonight was meant for family, for togetherness, for the kind of love that survives decades. Eleanor Whitmore was 82 years old. Her hair had turned silver long ago, but there was still strength in her posture, a quiet dignity that came from a life lived with resilience. Once, she had been a nurse during the war, patching up young men and comforting the dying with steady hands. Those memories still lingered in her eyes that had seen too much loss, but also knew the value of simple joys. Elena wasn't alone in her old age. She lived here with her son Richard, a man in his late 40s who had inherited his mother's sturdy frame and calm resolve. His wife, Margaret, filled the house with warmth, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread that reminded Eleanor of her own youth. And then there were the children, little Samuel, only 6, always running around with unmatched energy, and Emma, 9, thoughtful and quiet, always with a book in hand. But perhaps Eleanor's most faithful companion was Kaiser, a German shepherd with sharp amber eyes and a coat the color of midnight. He wasn't just a dog, he was the sentinel, a shadow that followed Eleanor everywhere, protective in a way only he could be. Kaiser had been with her through lonely winters and sleepless nights, and even now, with family around her, she often found herself resting a hand on his back, reassured by his presence. That evening, the house pulsed with life. The crackle of the fireplace mixed with the sound of carols playing softly on the old radio. Richard carried in logs for the fire while Margaret set the dining table, the plates gleaming against the glow of the candles. Samuel darted between rooms, hugging on Kaiser's ears, while Emma sat close to her grandmother, helping her knit the last rows of a scarf. "Careful with that yarn, dear," Eleanor said with a smile. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of someone who had guided many lives before. "Each stitch holds together better if you're patient." Emma looked up. "Wide-eyed like you held people together in the war, Grandma." The old woman paused, her hands stilling for a moment. She didn't often talk about the war, not because she was ashamed, but because so many memories were heavy to carry aloud. Still, tonight, with snow blanketing the world outside, she allowed herself a small nod. "Yes," she whispered. "Patience and steady hands. Sometimes that's all that stood between a soldier and his last breath." Silence fell over the room for just a moment, the kind of silence that makes even children pause. Then Kaiser shifted at her feet, letting out a low rumble, not of warning, but of comfort. Eleanor reached down, running her fingers through his thick fur, grounding herself in the present. The family dinner began soon after. Laughter echoed as Samuel insisted on carving the turkey, nearly toppling it from the platter before Richard rescued it. Margaret poured malt wine for the adults and warm cider for the children, the steam rising into the air. Stories were shared about childhood mischief, about Elena's late husband who once danced clumsily in this very room, about little things that seemed so ordinary but now felt precious. Elena sat back, watching them all, her heart swelling with a quiet gratitude. She had lived long enough to know that moments like these were fragile. One day, children grew, parents aged, and houses grew silent again. But tonight, she could feel life itself moving around her like firelight, warm, leading, beautiful. At one point, Richard raised a glass. "To family," he said, his voice steady but touched with emotion. "To Mom, for everything she's taught us, and to Christmas for keeping us all together." Glasses clinked. Laughter followed, and Kaiser barked once as if to add his own toast. Even Samuel cheered, though his was more interested in sneaking another piece of pie than in the meaning of the words. Later, as the children were tucked into bed and the house quieted again, Eleanor stepped out onto the porch. Snowflakes danced in the cold night air, brushing against her cheeks. Kaiser stood beside her, his breath fogging the darkness, ears pricked as though listening to something only he could hear. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter and looked up at the sky. "Another Christmas, old boy," she murmured to Kaiser, "and we're still here." The German shepherd pressed against her leg, his loyalty unspoken but undeniable. What Eleanor didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this Christmas Eve would mark the beginning of something much darker. The night looked peaceful now, but danger had already started its slow approach, hidden behind the glow of the holiday lights. And Kaiser, ever vigilant, would be the first to sense it. The house was quiet again after dinner, the kind of stillness that comes only once children fall asleep and the day surrenders to night. The fire had dimmed to embers, casting long shadows against the cabin walls. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling every sound, as if the world itself wanted to sleep. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her hands steady as she prepared her nightly ritual. On the table lay her insulin kit, a small case, lean and organized with the precision of someone who had once tended to soldiers' wounds under candlelight. Though she was old, her training as a nurse never left her. Every step mattered, every detail demanded care. She drew the insulin into the syringe, her thin fingers moving with practiced calm. Kaiser lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each second marking the rhythm of her careful preparation. And then Kaiser's ears twitched, his head snapped up, amber eyes burning into the darkness of the hallway. A low growl vibrated in his throat, deep and sharp. It startled Eleanor so suddenly that the syringe slipped in her hand, the needle pricking too close to her skin. She gasped, pulling back just in time, her heart lurching. "Kaiser," her voice trembled, caught between confusion and fear. "What is it, boy?" The German shepherd didn't look at her. His body stiffened, muscles tensed, as if preparing to leap. His growl deepened, echoing through the still kitchen, not like the playful rumblings he sometimes gave, but something primal, something that spoke of danger. Eleanor followed his gaze, her eyes shifting toward the window. At first, she saw only the familiar blur of falling snow, but then something broke the pattern, a flicker of orange, a light too violent to be the glow of Christmas decorations. She rose slowly, the syringe forgotten on the table, and walked to the frosted glass, her breath caught in her throat. Then, in the distance beyond the trees, flames licked the sky, fire, a roaring, merciless inferno swallowing the night. Her trembling hand pressed against the cold window pane. The old woman squinted, recognizing the shape of the building silhouetted in the blaze. And then the truth struck her like a physical blow. The nursing home, it was only half a mile down the road, a place where many of her old friends lived. She had visited just last week, sharing tea and stories with women she had known for decades. Some had been nurses like her, others widows of men long gone. That building wasn't just wood and briquettes, was memory, history, and fragile lives. Now, it was burning. "No," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Dear God, no." Behind her, Kaiser barked, loud and sharp, as though demanding she act. His body pressed against her legs, steady and insistent, keeping her from collapsing under the weight of what she saw. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, carried by the wind, but even from here, Eleanor knew they were too late. The flames were already consuming the roof, sparks leaping into the sky like cruel fireworks. The snow melted as it touched the inferno, hissing uselessly against the fire too powerful to fight. Memories surged unbidden in her mind. She remembered the smiles of the nurses, the frail hands of her friends clutching hers, the songs they hummed together by the piano. Faces, so many faces. Were they still inside? Were they already gone? Her knees weakened, and she grasped the edge of the windowsill for support. Kaiser pressed closer, his body firm against her trembling frame. For years, Eleanor had thought she had already seen the worst of life, war, loss, loneliness. But nothing had prepared her for this, a tragedy unfolding before her very eyes. In the quiet of Christmas Eve, the night outside glowed an angry orange, stark against the purity of falling snow. The world seemed split in two, peace inside a home, and horror just beyond. Eleanor whispered again, her voice breaking, Why tonight?" Kaiser's growl softened into a low whine, his head nudging her hand, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. But deep inside, something stirred, a whisper of instinct, the same instinct that had carried her through field hospitals and battlefronts. Something was wrong about this. Fire spreads fast, yes, but not like this, not so sudden, not so furious. She looked again at the blaze, her heart pounding. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a seed of her needs was planted. And though she didn't yet know it, this was only the beginning, for the fire was not an accident, and the warning growl from Kaiser was only the first sign of the darkness about to enter their lives. Morning came not with peace, but with silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that clung to the snow-covered town like a shroud. The sun barely pierced through the gray clouds, its light dim, reluctant, almost as though it too was morning. Inside the cabin, the scent of coffee drifted faintly through the air. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug that had long gone cold. She hadn't slept. The image of flames devouring the nursing home had burned itself into her mind, replaying again and again in the darkness of the night. Her son, David, moved quietly around the room, trying to hide his own unease. He turned on the small radio perched on the shelf, its static crackling before a solemn voice filled the air. "This morning, Authorities have confirmed a devastating fire at the Pinecrest nursing home. Emergency crews worked through the night, but tragically there are no survivors. All residents and staff on duty perished in the blaze. The words seemed to hang in the air, sick and unreal. No survivors. Eleanor's fingers trembled against the mug. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. It was David who turned quickly toward the radio, as though shutting it off would erase what had been spoken. But it was too late. The truth had already taken root. Catherine, Eleanor's daughter, stepped in from the hallway, her face pale, one hand pressed against her mouth. Behind her, the children stood uncertain, sensing something terrible had happened even if they didn't fully understand. Eleanor's eyes stared ahead, unfocused. As names began flooding her mind, Margaret, with her gentle laugh. Old Henry, who loved to play chess. Ruth, who had sung carols with her just last Christmas. Each memory rose like a ghost, and with it, the sharp sting of loss. "They're gone," Eleanor whispered finally, her voice cracking. "All of them." David placed a hand on her shoulder, strong but trembling. "Mom, I'm so sorry," the radio continued, the reporter's voice heavy with sorrow. "Investigators have yet to determine the cause of the fire, though preliminary reports suggest it spread unusually fast. Authorities are urging caution as they continue their search for answers. The community mourns the loss of over 40 lives this Christmas Eve." 40 lives. Eleanor's chest tightened. It wasn't just numbers, it was faces, conversations, hands she had held, people she had laughed with, comforted, prayed with, friends who had shared her long journey through life. Kaiser, sensing her despair, pressed close against her legs, his head nudging her trembling hands. She reached down slowly, fingers tangling in his thick fur, grounding herself in the warmth of the only steady presence she could cling to. The town itself seemed to sink under the weight of grief. From the cabin window, Eleanor could see neighbors gathering outside, voices hushed, movements slow. Cars moved along the snowy road, each driver wearing the same hollow expression. Pinecrest Nursing Home had been more than a building, it had been a cornerstone of their community, place where generations had entrusted their elders. Now, it was nothing more than ash. Catherine spoke softly, her eyes wet with tears. "So many families, so many homes shattered today." Eleanor nodded faintly, but her voice was little more than a whisper. "I knew them, most of them. I should have been there too." The word slipped out before she realized it, and a chill ran through her. She could have been there, if her family hadn't insisted she live with them. If her health had taken one wrong turn, she might have been another name on the list, read over the radio. David knelt beside her, his eyes meeting hers firmly. "Don't say that, Mom, you're here. You're safe with us." But safe felt like a fragile word, one that cracked under the weight of last night's memory. The fire had been too sudden, too consuming. Eleanor's ears as a nurse told her accidents rarely looked like that. Something about it gnawed at the back of her mind. Still, in that moment, grief drowned out suspicion. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely, her hand resting against Kaiser's head. The dog stayed still, silent now, as though he too understood that the family he watched over was mourning. Outside, the church bells began to toll, slow and heavy, each chime echoing through the frozen air. It was a call not of celebration, but of mourning, a town weeping together on Christmas morning. And as Eleanor listened, she felt something inside her fracture. Her friends were gone, the home that had been their sanctuary reduced to rubble. And though she could not yet name it, a shadow of suspicion stirred faintly within her heart, a shadow that would soon grow darker, sharper, and impossible to ignore. For now, she sat in silence, her family around her, the weight of loss pressing down like the endless snow outside. But deep down, a whisper remained. This fire was no accident, and the truth would not stay buried for long. The day stretched on in muted sorrow. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in a deceptive calm, but inside the cabin, grief lingered like smoke. The radio repeated the same words: "No survivors, still under investigation." A tragedy on Christmas Eve. Eleanor sat by the fire, her body heavy with exhaustion, her mind refusing to rest. Every so often, she would see their faces again: Margaret, Ruth, Henry, friends turned to ashes. She pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to steady the pounding in her head. But as she sat in silence, something else began to stir, a memory, not of Christmases past, nor of the war she once endured, but of something that had happened just the night before the fire. It came back in fragments at first: the knock on the door, the cold rush of winter air when she opened it, and the woman standing there, white coat, polite smile, carrying a medical bag. "Yes, Mrs. Walker," the woman had said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. Your physician sent me. He wanted me to check in on you, to administer a newer form of insulin. It should help stabilize your blood sugar more effectively. At the time, it hadn't seemed strange. Eleanor's doctor occasionally sent nurses or aides when he was unavailable, and the woman had the look of authority, professional. But the memory sharpened now, cutting deeper. She remembered the faint unease in Kaiser's growl, low and steady as the stranger entered. He hadn't trusted her. Eleanor had silenced him then, embarrassed. He's protective. Forgive him, she had said. The woman had only smiled. The injection itself had felt different, the needle sharp, the fluid thicker somehow. Within minutes, a wave of dizziness had washed over Eleanor, heavier than usual. She remembered clutching the armrest of her chair, trying to focus as the woman gave her a practiced reassurance. Side effects are normal, the woman had said calmly. You'll feel better soon. But she hadn't felt better. That night, she had gone to bed with a strange heaviness in her chest, her limbs weak, her head clouded. She had dismissed it as age, as fatigue, as one more burden of a failing body. Now, with the ashes of Pinecrest still smoldering in her mind, her unease grew into something sharper. Eleanor sat straighter in her chair, her breath catching. Why had her doctor not mentioned a new insulin? Why had he not called her directly? He always did. Always. Her eyes narrowed as the pieces began to shift in her mind. The woman had never given her a full name, only Dr. Evelyn, spoken quickly, as though meant to sound familiar. Eleanor couldn't recall ever hearing of her before. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her insulin kit. She opened the small case with deliberate care, pulling out the vial the woman had left behind. The label stared back at Herculean, sterile but something was wrong. The color of the cap, the font on the label, tiny details, subtle, but her nurse's eye caught them. She had worked with medications for decades. She knew what her regular insulin looked like. This was not it. Eleanor's heart began to race. She turned the vial in her hand, the liquid inside shimmering faintly under the firelight. A chill ran down her spine. Kaiser, sensing her agitation, padded closer, resting his head against her knee. His amber eyes met hers, steady, watchful. Something's not right, boy, she whispered, her voice trembling. Something's terribly wrong. Her mind raced back to the fire, to the sudden violent blaze that had taken everyone at Pint, and she thought again of the injection, the dizziness, the weakness, the stranger's rehearsed smile. A terrible possibility crept into her thoughts. What if it hadn't been meant to help her? What if it had been meant to harm? Her breath came shallow now, her chest tight with a mixture of fear and realization. Could the same women have visited Pine? Could she have given those poor souls the same medicine? The thought was unbearable, yet it rooted itself firmly in her mind. Eleanor closed her eyes, steadying herself. She was 82, yes. Her body was frail, her strength limited, but she was not naive. She had spent her youth patching soldiers together on the battlefield, recognizing when wounds were clean and when they were poisoned. And this smelled of poison. She opened her eyes again, determination flickering through the sorrow. The fire at Pinecrest may have destroyed the building, but perhaps it was more than an accident. Perhaps it was the final act in a chain of cruelty carefully hidden behind white coats and gentle words, and perhaps she herself had nearly been next. Kaiser gave a low growl, as if agreeing, as if he too sensed the shadow drawing closer to their lives. Eleanor tightened her grip on the vial, her old hands trembling but resolute. She whispered softly into the stillness of the room, "This isn't over, not yet." The storm outside had quieted, but inside Eleanor's chest, a different storm was beginning to stir. She sat at the kitchen table, the vial before her like a shard of ice that refused to melt. The label looked official to the untrained eye, but not to hers. She had handled countless bottles in her years as a nurse. This one didn't sit right. Her old hands adjusted her glasses, and she leaned closer. The text was slightly off. The print bled faintly at the edges, as if made by a cheaper machine. A small, almost invisible misspelling revealed itself under the lamplight. Not enough for most people to notice, but Eleanor did. She reached for the drawer by the stove, pulling out her old wooden box. Inside lay remnants of her life in medicine gauze pads, an antique stethoscope, and several unused vials of her regular prescription. She set them side by side with the newcomer. The difference was undeniable. The cap color was wrong. The liquid was cloudier. Even the smell, when she unscrewed the cap ever so slightly, was off. Her stomach tightened. Kaiser shifted on the floor, ears flicking as if sensing her unease. His eyes followed her every movement, loyal and unblinking. "This isn't just medicine, boy," she murmured, voice low. "This is something else entirely." But suspicions were not enough. She needed confirmation. She needed to know if her instincts sharpened over decades of war and healing were truly correct. Her trembling fingers reached for the phone mounted on the wall. It was an old landline, the kind most neighbors had abandoned for sleeker devices. But Eleanor trusted it. She dialed slowly, carefully. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Dr. Harris's office. How may I help you? Relief washed through her at the sound of the receptionist she had known for years. Yes, this is Mrs. Walker. May I speak with Dr. Harris directly? It's urgent. A pause. Then the line clicked as her physician came on. His warm, steady voice filled her ear. Eleanor, what's the matter? Are you feeling all right? She hesitated, clutching the vial tightly. Last night, a woman came to my home, said you would send her. She called herself Dr. Evelyn. She gave me an injection, said it was a new form of insulin. On the other end, silence. Then Dr. Harris spoke, his tone sharp with confusion. Eleanor, I never sent anyone, and I don't know any doctor named Evelyn. There's no one by that name in our clinic, or in the entire county, as far as I'm aware. Her breath caught. Are you certain? Positive, he replied firmly. Eleanor, listen to me carefully. Whatever she gave you, it wasn't from us. If you still have that vial, don't use it again. Do you understand? The room seemed to tilt as the truth struck her fully. Her fears were not paranoia. They were real. She swallowed hard, her voice shaking. Doctor, I think the same woman may have been at Pinecrest before the fire. My friends, they're all gone now. Dr. Harris's silence stretched long and heavy, until finally he said, Eleanor, this is serious. I want you to bring that vial to me tomorrow. We'll have it tested immediately, and if anything strange happens, if she returns, you call me. Don't open the door. Her grip on the phone tightened. She could hear the weight in his words. The urgency he tried to mask with calm professionalism. When she hung up, her hands shook uncontrollably. Kaiser rose, pressing against her leg for comfort. She reached down, stroking his fur, grounding herself in his presence. Did you hear that, boy? She whispered. She wasn't from the clinic. She wasn't anyone at all. The fire in the hearth crackled, throwing shadows across the room. Shadows that seemed longer now, darker. Eleanor felt the weight of something vast pressing against her world. Something hidden behind the veil of tragedy. The vial still sat on the table, its cloudy liquid gleaming faintly in the light. It wasn't just a bottle of medicine anymore. It was evidence. The first clue in a puzzle more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Her grief had not faded, but alongside it, now burned a sharper flame. She had survived war, loss, and the cruelty of time. And she would survive this, too. She straightened her back, her eyes steady. The woman in the white coat thought she had chosen an easy target. An old widow, a fragile body, a family distracted by Christmas joy. But she had chosen wrong. Eleanor Walker was not done yet, and with Kaiser at her side, she would uncover the truth, whatever the cost. Snow still clung stubbornly to the streets when Eleanor stepped out of the house the next morning. The world seemed hushed, as if the whole town had chosen silence out of respect for the dead at Pine. But her silence was different, with deliberate, calculated. She told her son she was simply visiting an old friend, and with that excuse, she slipped away. Kaiser padded faithfully beside her, his breath steaming in the frigid air. He sensed her unease, staying close, almost protective. Eleanor's destination was not a friend's home, but the place that had defined much of her life at the old county hospital. She had once walked its halls with purpose, back when her hands were steady and her legs were strong. Now, she returned as a relic, not to heal, but to hunt. The automatic doors slid open as she entered. The building smelled of disinfectant and echoes of the past. Young nurses bustled through the corridors, their faces unfamiliar, their energy sharp. None of them paid attention to the small, bent figure with snowflakes clinging to a coat. She made her way to the archives room, a wing few visited anymore. The clerk at the front desk, a man in his 40s with thinning hair, barely glanced at her. Elena leaned on the counter, offering a polite smile. I used to work here, she said softly, back when records were still on paper. I wondered if you could let me look at some old files, just for memory's sake. The clerk shrugged. As long as you don't remove anything, ma'am. The old cabinets are in the back. Not many people go there these days. Perfect. She shuffled down the hall, her cane tapping lightly against the tile. Behind her, Kaiser's nails clicked softly. Once inside the records room, she shut the door quietly and exhaled. Rows of metal filing cabinets stood like silent soldiers, guarding decades of history. Dust coated their surfaces. Eleanor's fingers, though stiff with age, still knew the rhythm of searching. She pulled open drawers, scanning for the name that had haunted her since that night. Vivian Cross. The name came easily to mind, like a scar you couldn't forget. The woman who called herself Evelyn had slipped once, letting a different name escape her lips. Elena wasn't sure then, but now she needed to be. The first two drawers yielded nothing. Old discharge papers, financial ledgers, forgotten staff rosters. She pressed on, her breath growing shallow. Finally, in the third drawer, her fingers froze over a manila folder. The tab read, Cross, Vivian, M.D. Her heart pounded. Slowly, she pulled it out, laying it on the table under the dim light. The file was thin, too thin for a practicing physician. That in itself was suspicious. She flipped it open. Inside were scattered notes, brief employment records, a few then buried deeper a small collection of flagged reports. Patient deaths, anesthetic allegations of forged prescriptions. Each incident had been dismissed as inconclusive, but Elena knew the language of bureaucracy. Words like inconclusive and unsubstantiated were often shields, polite veils drawn over truths too ugly to confront. At the back of the file, a single sheet bore the faint stamp of internal review. Half the text was redacted, black line and smothering entire paragraphs, but one sentence remained. Dr. Cross's methods warranted further scrutiny. Recommend reassignment pending investigation. Eleanor's jewel clenched. The rest of the report had been sealed. The hospital hadn't fired her. They had simply moved her, hiding the rot instead of cutting it out. A shiver ran through her. How many lives had been quietly sacrificed to protect the reputation of an institution? How many Pinecrests had already burned, unseen and reported? Kaiser gave a low growl, snapping her from her thoughts. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly outside the room. She quickly slid the folder back into the drawer, pushing it shut just as the door handle rattled. A young nurse poked her head in. "Oh, sorry ma'am, didn't know anyone was in here." Eleanor forced a smile, steadying her voice. "Just taking a walk down memory lane. These holes hold a lot of ghosts, don't they?" The nurse chuckled politely before disappearing again. Eleanor waited until the footsteps faded before exhaling slowly. Her hands trembled as she gathered her coat. She had what she came for, not proof enough for the police yet, but confirmation. Vivian Cross was real. Vivian Cross was dangerous. And Vivian Cross had already left a trail of suspicion thick enough to choke on. As she stepped back into the cold, Kaiser pressed against her leg. She bent down, resting a hand on his fur. "We're not crazy, boy," she whispered. "Something's rotten, and now we know her name." The town bustled faintly around them, unaware of the truth unfolding in its shadows. But Eleanor carried it with her now, heavier than any burden she had borne in war. The woman who had knocked on her door that snowy Christmas Eve wasn't just a stranger, she was a predator, and Eleanor Walker was her chosen prey. But predators could bleed, and Eleanor had just found her first weapon, the truth. The snow had not yet melted from the eaves when the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, startling in the quiet morning. Eleanor sat in her armchair by the fire, her knitting needles frozen mid. Kaiser's ears shot up first. Then came the growlo, rumbling, primal. Her son Daniel was the one who rose to answer the door. His voice carried easily into the living room. "Dr. Cross, what a surprise. Come in, please. Come in." The name struck Eleanor like ice water. Her fingers tightened around the yarn in her lap. Slowly, deliberately, she set it aside. Her breath caught between ribs, and then she appeared. Vivian Cross, perfectly composed, the picture of professionalism in her neatly pressed coat, her medical bag hanging casually at her side. Her smile was warm, her eyes bright. To anyone else, she looked like an angel of mercy, a doctor making a house call out of kindness. But Kaiser knew better. His growl deepened, vibrating through the floorboards. He stepped forward, body taut, every muscle braced for something Eleanor could feel, but Daniel could not. Vivian's gaze flickered toward the dog, and for a fraction of a second, her smile faltered. Only Eleanor caught it. Only Eleanor saw the cold flash of irritation in those eyes before the mask slid back into place. "Eleanor," Vivian said sweetly, stepping into the living room as if she owned it. "I heard about the fire at Pinecrest, such a tragedy. I wanted to check in on you, make sure you're managing after such a shock." Daniel beamed, clearly touched. "That's very thoughtful of you. Dr. Mom's been shaken, of course, but it means a lot that you'd come all this way." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes never left Vivian. She could feel her pulse quickening, not from gratitude, but from dread. Kaiser positioned himself between them, head low, teeth bared, just enough to gleam in the firelight. Vivian clucked her tongue softly, feigning patience. "Oh, dogs can be so protective, Kongde, but you don't need to worry, Kaiser. I'm only here to help." The dog didn't buy it, neither did Eleanor. Vivian drew closer, setting her bag on the coffee table with a delicate click of metal against wood. "I thought I might check your insulin levels, Eleanor. just to be safe." She spoke as though it were nothing, as though she hadn't already nearly poisoned her once. Daniel turned to his mother. "That might be good, Mum, just for peace of mind." Eleanor nodded faintly, though her insides screamed. She had to play this carefully. If she pushed back too hard, Daniel would question her sanity. If she submitted to ice, she might not survive. Vivian opened her bag, the gleam of a syringe catching the light. "It'll only take a moment." Kaiser barked sharply then, a single explosive sound that shattered the room's calm. Daniel startled, frowning. "Hey, quiet down." But Eleanor understood. Kaiser wasn't just barking at a stranger, he was warning her, the same way he had warned her on Christmas Eve. Vivian's hand hovered, steady as stone, yet Eleanor caught the flicker again, the tiniest tremor of annoyance. That mask of kindness was cracking, if only at the edges. "Perhaps another time," Eleanor said softly, folding her hands. "I've already taken my dose this morning. No need to trouble yourself." Vivian tilted her head, smiled sharp enough to cut glass. "Of course, but, consistency is key. Sometimes an extra check can mean the difference between life and..." She stopped herself, lips curving higher, "and comfort." Daniel didn't notice the slip, but Eleanor did. Every syllable burned into her. Vivian leaned back, closing the bag with a decisive snap. "Another day then, but do call me if you feel unwell. I'm always available." Her gaze lingered on Eleanor, heavy, deliberate. It wasn't a doctor's gaze. It was the gaze of a hunter, measuring her prey. When she finally rose to leave, Kaiser followed, hackles raised, tail stiff like a spear. Vivian paused at the threshold, lowering her voice just enough for Eleanor to hear, and no one else. "You're stronger than most, Eleanor. But everyone falters eventually." The words were silk, but the threat beneath was steel. Then she was gone, her footsteps crunching over snow. Daniel shut the door, shaking his head. "Honestly, Mom, Kaiser's got to calm down." He nearly bit her. Eleanor reached down, running her trembling fingers through the thick fur of her companion. Kaiser's heart hammered as hard as hers. "No," she whispered, her voice low enough that only the dog could hear. "He sees what you can't, and I trust him with my life." The fire crackled again, filling the silence Vivian had left behind. But it was not warmth Eleanor felt. It was a chill that settled into her bones, because now she knew for certain Vivian Cross had crossed her threshold, and next time, she wouldn't just bring concern, she would bring death. The house had long since settled into silence. Upstairs, Daniel and his family slept soundly, their laughter from dinner now only a memory drifting through the halls. The wind outside moaned against the windows, carrying with it the lonely chill of winter. But Eleanor was still awake. She sat in the dim light of her bedside lamp, Kaiser at her feet. The dog's ears twitched at every creak, every shift of the house. He too sensed the weight in the air. Then, as if conjured by that weight, came the knock. Not the polite ring of a doorbell, not the hurried rap of an urgent visitor. It was a slow, deliberate tap, 3 times. Her heart sank. She didn't need to guess who it was. She opened the door herself, whispering for Kaiser to stay close. And there stood Vivian Cross, still immaculate, still smiling, though at this hour in this quiet, the smile felt more like a mask than ever. "I thought you might still be awake," Vivian said softly. Her voice carried the same honey tone, but there was something else beneath it now, something darker. "May I come in?" Just for a moment, Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside. She had to know more. If she was ever going to stop this woman, she needed proof, words, admissions, something that could not be denied. They sat across from each other in the living room, the fire reduced to faint embers. Shadows danced against the walls, swallowing more than they revealed. Kaiser remained at Eleanor's side, his growl low, constant, like a warning drumbeat. "You've been through so much," Vivian began, her eyes locked on Eleanor's. "Losing your friends, living with this terrible suspicion in your heart. I can see it on your face." Eleanor lowered her gaze, feigning frailty. She let her hands tremble against the arm of the chair, her breath come shallow. "It's true," she whispered. "Since that night, I've felt different. The insulin, the fire. Sometimes I wonder if it's all connected, or if I'm just losing my mind." Vivian leaned forward, her smile widening. "Oh, you're not losing your mind. You're sharper than most. That's why I admire you." "Elena," the words chilled her. "Admire," from the lips of a killer. She forced herself to look weaker still, tilting her head, narrowing her eyes as though fighting sleep. Vivian's tone shifted, dropping the veneer of sweetness, just slightly. "Do you know what it's like to hold someone's life in your hands, to watch their pulse fade, their breath weaken, all because of a single decision you made?" Eleanor swallowed, her voice barely audible. "You speak as if you've done it." The doctor's eyes gleamed in the hot light. I have, many times, and always with precision, a dose here, a change there. Insulin is such a beautiful tool, so quick, so clean. The body betrays itself, and no one ever suspects. Kaiser barked once, sharp, piercing. Vivian didn't flinch. She only looked down at the dog with a smirk. Your friend at Pinecrest, she continued, voice dripping with pride. All of them, gone in an instant. The fire was convenient, yes, but not necessary. Their bodies would have told no tales. Even without the flames. Elena let her head sink against the chair, pretending weakness, even as every word seared itself into her memory. But why them? Vivian's lips curled, because they were already forgotten, old, fragile, wasting away. No one questions when such lives end. In fact, most are relieved. Families move on, money is freed, it's efficient. The coldness of it nearly broke Eleanor's mask. She forced herself to cough weakly, to look small and powerless. And me, was I next? Vivian leaned closer, so close Eleanor could feel the chill of her breath. Of course you were, you still are, but you're fascinating. You resist, you fight, that makes you special. Her voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and cruel. But no one fights forever. The room seemed to shrink around them. The only sounds were Kaiser's growl and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting her body sag as though surrendering to exhaustion. But inside, her mind blazed. She had her confession, not recorded, not written, but spoken freely, offered in arrogance. She needed more. Just one last piece. Why tell me this? She murmured, barely moving her lips. Vivian smiled, her teeth flashing in the dark. Because you won't live long enough to tell anyone else. Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating. Eleanor forced a weak laugh, her voice raspy perhaps, but tonight is not the night. Vivian's smile faltered, just a little enough for Eleanor to see the crack. The doctor stood, smoothing her coat, her mask of sweetness sliding back into place. Rest well, Eleanor, tomorrow. We'll continue your care. With that, she turned and left, her footsteps echoing down the hall, fading into the night. Eleanor exhaled, her body trembling. She reached down, stroking Kaiser's fur. The dog pressed closer, his eyes never leaving the door. We have her, Eleanor whispered. Now we just need proof. And in the dying light of the fire, she knew the game had changed. The hunter had spoken, and now the hunted would fight back. The morning after that unsettling encounter, the house felt unusually heavy. Eleanor moved slowly around the kitchen, her mind sharper than her body, replaying every detail of Vivian's visit, the way her hands lingered on Eleanor's wrist, the strange calmness in her eyes, predator calm. She knew it wasn't enough to feel the truth, she had to prove it. That evening, once the grandchildren were tucked away in their rooms, Eleanor called her son Michael into the study. He found her seated at the oak desk, Sizer by her side, as always. The dog's ears pricked with a sense of tension in the air. Sit, Michael, Eleanor said, her voice firm. We don't have much time. Michael frowned. Mother. What's going on? She slid open the drawer and revealed the small insulin vial Vivian had left behind. Its label looked identical to the others, but Eleanor's instincts screamed otherwise. This, she whispered, isn't what it claims to be. I need you to help me keep it safe. Michael leaned closer, his jaw tightening. He had always known his mother was strong, but seeing her like this, eyes blazing with that old soldier's fire, shook him. We'll hide it, he said. Lock it in the old toolbox in the shed. No one would think to look there. Eleanor nodded. And we need more cameras, something that catches her if she comes back. Michael rubbed his chin. I've got the old security cameras from the shop. They still work. I can set them up in the hall and kitchen, maybe even your room. Eleanor's lips curved into a grim smile. Good. If she tries anything, we'll have her face, her hands, her lies. The door creaked open, then soft footsteps, and there stood Anna, Michael's wife, holding a tray of tea. She looked between them, sensing the heaviness of the conversation but not prying. You'd plotting something again, she teased lightly, setting the cups down. Eleanor gave her a tired smile. Just being careful, dear. But when Anna left, something unexpected happened. Their youngest child, little Emma, slipped into the study moments later, clutching her teddy bear. She had overheard more than she should have. Grandma, Emma whispered, I saw you hide the bottle. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. I'll keep it secret. Like in the spy games Daddy plays with us. Eleanor froze, her heart both tender and heavy. The innocence of children was dangerous but also a shield. She knelt, brushing Emma's hair back. You're a very good secret keeper, Emma said softly, but this is a very important secret, one you must guard with your heart. Can you do that for me? Emma nodded solemnly, her tiny hands squeezing Ella. By the end of that night, the plan was in motion. The vial was hidden away, the cameras quietly installed, and even without knowing it, Anna's simple presence had bought them precious time. Her constant movements in the kitchen, her habit of double-checking locked doors, her watchful love over the children. Piece by piece the evidence was being gathered, and though Eleanor's body was fragile, her spirit surged with purpose. Kaiser stretched at her feet, his deep growl vibrating softly as if he, too, understood. The trap was being set, and when Vivian returned, she would not find a helpless old woman, she would find a soldier waiting. The snow fell thicker that evening, blanketing the little house in silence. The world outside looked peaceful white.com, untouched, but inside, unease coiled in Eleanor's chest. She sat in her armchair, Kaiser pressed against her leg, his body stiff, ears flicking toward the front door as if he already knew what was coming. At 9:15 a knock echoed through the hall, not a polite knock, a slow, deliberate pounding that rattled the wood. Michael opened the door, and there she stood, Vivian Cross. Her white coat was gone, replaced with a heavy black overcoat, her hair slick from the snow. But it was her eyes that froze Eleanor's blood, cold, sharp, knowing. Evening, Vivian said, her smile too wide. I thought I'd stop by, check on Eleanor after such a tragic week. Eleanor's hands gripped the armrests. Kaiser let out a low growl, deep and guttural. Anna appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands nervously in the towel. The children peered from the hallway, sensing danger but not understanding it. Michael hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in, he said, though his voice carried a warning edge. Vivian entered, her eyes swept the room once, lingering a fraction too long on the corners where the tiny cameras were hidden. Eleanor felt her stomach drop, Vivian knew, and then like a mask slipping, the doctor's smile hardened. You've been busy, haven't you, Eleanor? She murmured, hiding bottles, planting cameras, spies in your own home. Michael stiffened. What are you talking about? Vivian's hand slid into her coat pocket. Metal glinted beneath the fabric, a syringe, not for healing, this one meant for silence. Anna gasped, clutching the children closer. The room erupted in motion. Michael lunged forward, trying to disarm her, but Vivian was faster. Darting toward Eleanor, Kaiser exploded into action, a blur of fur and teeth, slamming into Vivian's side before she could strike. The syringe clattered across the wooden floor. Get the kids upstairs, Eleanor shouted, her old soldier's voice sharp and commanding. Anna grabbed Emma and Daniel, rushing them up the staircase as Vivian and the dog rolled across the rug. Vivian shrieked, her hands smashing against Kaiser's muzzle. But the shepherd refused to let go, his jaws locked on her sleeve. Blood streaked the carpet as she slashed with a concealed blade, grazing the dog's side. Kaiser yelped but surged back, forcing her into the wall. Michael dove for the weapon on the ground, but Vivian kicked hard, knocking him backward. She bolted for the back door, snow and wind crashing inside as it swung open. The chase began. Eleanor grabbed her cane, forcing her frail body upright. She would not let Vivian escape. Michael followed, stumbling through the snow, while Kaiser bounded ahead, his paw prints burning a trail across the frozen yard. The night was chaos. The storm howled, snowflakes blinding, breath visible in the bitter cold. Vivian sprinted toward the tree, desperate to vanish into the dark. But Kaiser was faster. He leaped, colliding with her in the snow, forcing her down. She screamed, slashing wildly with the blade. The dog took the hit to his flank but held her. Heath sunk deep into her arm. Eleanor arrived seconds later, her cane sinking into the snow. She raised her voice not with fear, but with the command of a veteran who had once led soldiers into fire. Drop it, Vivian. It's over. For a moment, Vivian froze, pinned beneath the shepherd's fury, the snow soaking her coat crimson. Then headlights flashed through the storm. The sheriff's truck, summoned by Michael's earlier call when suspicion first grew too strong to ignore. Vivian's fight drained as deputies dragged her up, shackling her bloodied wrists. She screamed curses into the storm, her face twisted with rage. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, reaching for Kaiser. His fur was matted with blood, his breath ragged, but his eyes remained bright, loyal. He had done what no one else could, stood between death and the family he swore to protect. That night, the snow carried both the echo of violence and the quiet promise of justice. But Eleanor knew the battle was not finished until the truth of Vivian's crimes came fully to light. The storm outside had begun to settle, leaving the town wrapped in a muffled silence. But inside Eleanor's home, tension hung heavy in the air. Snow melted on the floorboards where boots had stomped in, leaving puddles around the deputies as they spread out through the living room. Vivian Cross, once the trusted doctor, now sat in a wooden chair, wrists bound in steel cuffs. Her hair clung to her face, her eyes darting from Eleanor to the sheriff with a venomous glare. Gone was the mask of compassion, only raw fury remained. Sheriff Alden, a tall man with weathered lines etched into his face, laid a folder on the table. His voice was steady, but underneath there was anger, the kind of anger that came when betrayal struck the very heart of a community. "Mrs. Eleanor, your son Michael delivered these files to my office 2 nights ago," he said, tapping the folder, "and tonight the cameras you planted filled in the rest." Eleanor sat back. Exhaustion deepened her bones, but her eyes sharp. She remembered every step, slipping the small lens into the lamp, guiding Michael on how to angle the second camera toward the kitchen, warning Anna to hide the third beneath the mantel clock. She knew they didn't have the strength to fight Vivian outright, but proof that was their weapon. The sheriff pulled out photographs, still frames from the hidden recordings. Vivian's hand swapping insulin vials, her cold smile as she prepared the syringe, her muttered confession caught on the microphone, "Insulin leaves no trace." The room seemed to shrink as deputies laid the evidence out one by one. Michael clenched his fists. Anna wrapped her arms around Emma and Daniel, shielding their eyes, though she knew they didn't understand the full horror. Kaiser lay at Elena's feet, a fresh bandage across his flank. His amber eyes locked on Vivian as if daring her to move. Vivian laughed suddenly, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the silence. "You think this will hold in court? Do you know how many strings I've pulled? How many colleagues I own? I've been untouchable for years." But the sheriff's gaze did not waver. He slammed the folder shut with a crack. "Not anymore. The fire at the nursing home, the missing patients, the falsified charts, it all ties back to you. And thanks to Eleanor here, we've got enough to bury you under every life you stole." Eleanor's voice, though raspy, carried across the room with the authority of someone who had seen both war and peace. "You preyed on the weak, Vivian, on people who trusted you. You thought their silence was permanent. But tonight, they spoke through us." For the first time, Vivian faltered. Her eyes flicked toward Eleanor with rage now, but with the dawning recognition that her empire of lies had finally collapsed. The deputies hauled her to her feet. She fought, spitting curses, thrashing against their grip. But it was useless. The door slammed open, the cold night air sweeping in as they dragged her out toward the waiting cruiser. When the sound of the engine faded into the snowy dark, the house fell quiet again. Michael exhaled shakily, sitting beside his mother. "It's over, Mom." Eleanor looked down at Kaiser, stroking his head with trembling fingers. "No," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "This is just the beginning. The dead will have their voices now." And in that moment, with the last embers of the fire crackling in the hearth, Eleanor knew justice was finally moving. The courthouse was packed. Families filled the wooden benches, their faces a mixture of grief, hope, and weary anticipation. For months they had waited for this day, the day the woman who had stolen so much from them would finally face the weight of the law. Eleanor sat quietly in the front row beside her son Michael, Anna, and the children. Kaiser lay curled at her feet, a silent guardian even here. Though her body ached and her breathing came slow, Eleanor's eyes remained sharp, fixed on the woman across the room. Vivian Cross no longer looked like the polished physician who once walked hospital halls. Her white coat had been traded for the plain gray of a prison uniform. The arrogance that once dripped from her every word had drained away, leaving only a hollow, pale figure. The judge's gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. The room stilled. "Vivian Cross," the judge intoned, voice steady and clear, "you've been convicted on multiple counts of first-degree murder, medical malpractice, and arson resulting in the death of 17 patients. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling for the lost. A sob broke from one of the families seated behind Eleanor. Another clutched a photograph of their father, tears streaming freely. For so long, they had carried the weight of unanswered questions, the torment of thinking their loved ones had simply slipped away quietly. Now the truth was carved into the record. They had been victims, not forgotten souls. Eleanor lowered her head, a silent prayer moving through her heart for each of the 17 names. She remembered their faces, some she had worked alongside in her youth, others she had visited at the nursing home. Tonight, they could finally rest. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Mom. She can't hurt anyone else." Eleanor looked at him, her lips trembling into the faintest of smiles. "No, she can't. But remember this, Michael, evil only thrives when good people stay silent. We did what we had to do, and those families," she gestured toward the crowd, "they're free of the shadows now." The families approached her afterward, one by one, Some shook her hand. Some embraced her. Others simply wept as they whispered thank you. Each gratitude felt heavy and humbling, for Eleanor knew she had not done it alone. Without Michael, Anna, the children, and Kaiser, she would not have survived. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted gently under the pale winter sun. Reporters clustered at the steps, snapping photos, calling out questions. But Eleanor ignored them. She wasn't here for headlines. She stepped into the cold air, her breath clouding before her. Anna held Emma's mittened hand. Daniel rode on Michael's shoulders, their laughter cutting through the heaviness of the day. For the first time in months, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe deeply. Kaiser brushed against her leg, pressing close as if to remind her that this battle was won, but life still waited beyond. She bent down, scratched behind his ears, and whispered, "We did it, old friend." We made sure their voices were heard. For Eleanor and her family, the nightmare had ended. They had walked through fire, faced death, and unmasked evil. And though scars would remain, tonight the snow seemed brighter, the air lighter. Justice had finally been served. The courthouse was packed. Families filled the wooden benches, their faces a mixture of grief, hope, and weary anticipation. For months they had waited for this day, the day the woman who had stolen so much from them would finally face the weight of the law. Eleanor sat quietly in the front row beside her son Michael, Anna, and the children. Kaiser lay curled at her feet, a silent guardian even here. Though her body ached and her breathing came slow, Eleanor's eyes remained sharp, fixed on the woman across the room. Vivian Cross no longer looked like the polished physician who once walked hospital halls. Her white coat had been traded for the plain gray of a prison uniform. The arrogance that once dripped from her every word had drained away, leaving only a hollow, pale figure. The judge's gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. The room stilled. "Vivian Cross," the judge intoned, voice steady and clear. "You stand convicted on multiple counts of first-degree murder, medical malpractice, and arson resulting in the death of 17 patients. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling for the lost. A sob broke from one of the families seated behind Eleanor. Another clutched a photograph of their father, tears streaming freely. For so long, they had carried the weight of unanswered questions, the torment of thinking their loved ones had simply slipped away quietly. Now the truth was carved into the record. They had been victims, not forgotten souls. Eleanor lowered her head, a silent prayer moving through her heart for each of the 17 names. She remembered their faces, some she had worked alongside in her youth, others she had visited at the nursing home. Tonight, they could finally rest. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Mom. She can't hurt anyone else." Elena looked at him, her lips trembling into the faintest of smiles. "No, she can't, but remember this, Michael, evil only thrives when good people stay silent. We did what we had to do, and those families," she gestured toward the crowd, "they're free of the shadows now." The families approached her afterward, one by one. Some shook her hand, some embraced her, others simply wept as they whispered thank you. Each gratitude felt heavy and humbling, for Eleanor knew she had not done it alone. Without Michael, Anna, the children, and Kaiser would not have survived. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted gently under the pale winter sun. Reporters clustered at the steps, snapping photos, calling out questions. But Eleanor ignored them. She wasn't here for headlines. She stepped into the cold air, her breath clouding before her. Anna held Emma's mittened hand. Daniel rode on Michael's shoulders, their laughter cutting through the heaviness of the day. For the first time in months, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe deeply. Kaiser brushed against her leg, pressing close as if to remind her that this battle was won, but life still waited beyond. She bent down, scratched behind his ears, and whispered, "We did it, old friend." We made sure their voices were heard. For Eleanor and her family, the nightmare had ended. They had walked through fire, faced death, and unmasked evil, and those scars would remain. Tonight the snow seemed brighter, the air lighter. Justice had finally been served.